It's time for Tycoons of Small Biz, spotlighting the true backbone of the American economy, the true tycoons of business in America, the owners, founders, and CEOs of small businesses. The show's hosts, Austin Peterson and Landon Mance, are registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors Corporation, a broker-dealer, member SIPC, and registered investment advisor. The views expressed by your hosts, Austin and Landon, are not necessarily the views of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Backbone Planning Partners is a marketing name for registered representatives of Lincoln Financial Advisors. Now let's lean in as Austin and Landon connect with this week's Tycoons.
Good afternoon, Tycoons, and welcome to today's episode of Tycoons of Small Biz. I am your host here, as always, Austin Peterson, coming to you live from our studio here in Tempe, Arizona. My co-host Landon Mance is not here today and is going to slowly fade away from being a host on the program due to some constraints that we have in our day jobs or in our business, and so you've got just me. So hopefully the listenership stays the same. Maybe it goes higher. We'll figure that out, and I'll be able to discuss that with Landon in the future. We're excited to have a guest in the studio today, Jenny Mullins, co-founder and program director of Advocacy 319. It's a nonprofit that specializes in working with foster children, so we're going to get to that in just a second. But if this is the first time that you've listened to our program and you're not sure what we do here at Tycoons of Small Biz, we're a radio show and a podcast for small business by small business. What I mean by that is Landon and I are small business owners. We're also children and grandchildren of small business owners, and so small business really runs in our blood. And we believe that the backbone of the American economy is the small business owner. Alongside that, about once a quarter, you see us highlight a nonprofit, which is what we're going to do today. And so it's kind of a special episode that we do once a quarter because nonprofits are important. And the reality is a lot of business owners in our community give freely of their resources to nonprofits to help these nonprofits survive. And we want to make sure that, nonprofits have an opportunity to thrive and to be lifted up and celebrated, so to speak. So today we definitely do have a tycoon of small biz, even though it's on the nonprofit side. Jenny Mullins, like I said earlier, with as co-founder and program director of Advocacy 319. So Jenny, welcome to the studio.
Thank you so much. It's an honor to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you, and we obviously love having studios and guests. You get the full experience. You get to put the headphones on and have the really nice microphones, et cetera. So before we jump in as to what you do at Advocacy 319, why don't you just tell us a little bit about you personally, where you grew up, what your background is, and kind of what led you to start here with Advocacy 319?
Yeah, actually, I grew up in Tempe, Arizona, not far from where we're recording right now. Moved here when I was really young, but have lived here ever since. And my background is I was a teacher for about 10 years, elementary education, and then stopped teaching when I had my daughter who was diagnosed with autism. And that kind of veered my trajectory a little bit towards special education and really advocating for my own daughter and what her needs were. And that kind of led me to advocate for other kids that had special needs. And yeah, that led me down this path of being a part of a nonprofit and starting a nonprofit.
Gotcha. So how long ago did you launch Advocacy 319?
Yeah, we started out in 2017 was kind of our soft launch, and then 2018 we got our 501c3.
Okay.
Yeah.
So tell us what it is that you guys do.
Yeah, great question. So we, our nonprofit, we have two main programs that serve students in foster care. And our main mission is to advocate for the educational success of students in foster care. So our first program is we have a team of advocates that is matched up with foster families and just kind of helps them navigate the special education process, how to get their child evaluated by the school or how to get tutoring or counseling or whatever the kid needs at school, help them navigate that whole process. And then as we started doing that, we realized that the kids that have been in foster care obviously have been impacted by trauma. And so that affects how they learn. And so we realized that the school oftentimes doesn't know much about how trauma impacts how they learn. And so we started doing trainings for school staff, for behavioral health agencies on trauma and kind of doing some research-based training for schools and other agencies as well.
Okay. Yeah. So any history yourself with the foster care system? Or, I mean, obviously you have a child with some special needs on the autism spectrum, but That's a far cry from, foster care.
Right. Yeah. So my husband and I were actually in the process of becoming foster parents right when our daughter got diagnosed with autism. So we put that on hold, but I still had it in my heart really for kids in foster care. So I started volunteering with a couple other local nonprofits as a mentor for birth moms, and then also working with kids in foster care. And they really just gripped my heart and saw just the resilience that they had. And so as I was a special education advocate, I kept getting all these foster families referred to me, and I couldn't bear to charge them for my services. So started this nonprofit as a way to kind of have an impact in foster care without being a foster parent myself. And kind of how we launched was I got in touch with a friend from high school who was a foster parent of 7, which seemed really overwhelming to me, and helped her with the whole school process. And we stood in a parking lot of a school and just dreamed about what it would look like to have a nonprofit that provided this support. And that parking lot conversation was really the catalyst that led to starting this organization. So we started it about 6 months later. We started it together.
Wow.
Yeah.
So does she still have 7 foster children?
She does. She adopted them. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, good for her. That's
Yeah.
I mean, 7 children, period, is a
Exactly.
lot.
It
right?
is.
But when it's foster children, sometimes that comes with, like you said,
Yeah.
trauma or other baggage that
Mhm.
makes it even more difficult to
Right.
help them. So
Yeah.
hats off to her for doing that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, my wife and I actually fostered a child for about 6 months is all, and it ended up being a better fit for her to be placed with a different family, and she's thriving and doing very well now. She's actually an adult now.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she might be 18, maybe 16, 17,
Okay.
in that range. So that was quite a while ago, but that gave us a taste of what it's like. And then I also have a cousin that has fostered many children over the last 4 or 5 years. They've adopted some, they've wanted to adopt others. And sometimes it's just really heartbreaking because you
Yeah.
get so close with them. You see the kids start to thrive, and then
Right.
ultimately they get placed back with their parents.
Right. Yeah. And one thing I've noticed, it was always my desire to foster myself, but just life circumstances made that not possible. But what I've learned is there's so many different roles and ways to support kids in foster care, whether it's fostering yourself or supporting the families that are doing that work, because it's really, really hard work. And so to, have other people and other roles that can support those kids in different ways is huge.
Yeah, no doubt. We can all, there's a lot of things that all of us can do without
Yeah.
taking that full step. So, I've already said the name Advocacy 31.9 several times. It doesn't roll off the tongue exactly. So tell us a little bit about where that came from and why your tagline's amplifying your voice.
Yeah. So we were joking that we were not branding experts when we started this nonprofit, but it comes from the verse in Proverbs 31:9, and it says, "Stand up, speak rightly, defend the rights of the poor and vulnerable." And so when we set out and had our mission, we really felt like that captured the mission of what we were trying to do. And then the tagline, "Amplify your voice," we really feel like students in foster care have a voice, and they're incredibly resilient and have a lot to teach us, but oftentimes their voice is not heard, whether it's at school or moving around from place to place. And so we really feel like our job as advocates is to amplify the voice and what they need to the people that have the power to be able to meet that need.
Yeah, I think it's critical, right? I mean, I think all children need advocates, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's why we have parents
Right.
regardless. But if there's anything unique or different than, not that anybody's normal, but quote
Right.
unquote normal
Right.
children, then it's that much more crucial, right? Just like you advocate for your daughter that's on the autism spectrum,
Right.
there's different advocacy needs from the foster care system. The reality is, I mean, people kind of have an idea, but if you're disengaged, children in foster care have gone through a lot of things that are pretty difficult,
Right.
and not the least of which being removed from your home and the parents that you've known your whole life to then be in a completely different area and wonder what your future holds.
Right. And even just, if the removal is traumatic on top of whatever trauma they've experienced, but then if they're moved to another location, and just that constant change, I think, is just really hard. And so they do need an advocate, someone that can step in and say, this is what this child needs. And I think foster parents are amazing because they oftentimes are advocates in that way, but they get kind of lost in the education world. Unless they've had a background in education or know about special education, it can be really confusing. And so that's kind of where we feel like we can come alongside and help take away some of the anxiety that comes with that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just said foster parents are amazing, and I agree 100%.
Yeah.
The only foster parents that I know in my life are just amazing people, big hearts, want to give back.
Yeah.
But, unfortunately, we see on TV and in the movies that a lot of foster parents in these situations. So maybe you can dispel or confirm this myth, so to speak. But it looks as though in these movies that these foster parents, they're doing it for the money, they're taking on as many foster children as they can, and that's kind of how they're living, but then the foster kids don't have a great life. So what's your experience been like here in Arizona with that?
Yeah, I mean, my experience with the families that we interact with are incredibly sacrificial families that give up a lot to take in children. I mean, I do think that there are bad apples that give a lot of foster parents a bad name, and that's really unfortunate. But I think I talked to a foster mom that said she worked out the math, and I think she gets like $1.50 per day for her child. So if you're doing it for the money, you're kind of in the wrong profession. You might need to talk to you and get some financial advice or something, because, I mean, you're not getting a lot of money. You end up giving much more of yourself and your time and your resources if you go into being a foster parent. So in my opinion or my experience, I haven't seen that. I have heard similar stories, on the news or whatever, but I think those are outliers for sure. And the majority are just people that want to love on kids that need to be loved.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And I just wanted to make sure that got dispelled, because when you watch TV, that's kind of what you see most about foster parents, and unfortunately that's just not the norm. It's just it's just like I tell my own clients, when you're watching the news to see how the market's doing and have that drive your thought process about your own investments, you're doing it wrong, right? Because they're there to sell advertisements, and so they're always using sensationalized messages.
Exactly. Yeah, for sure.
Well, good. So tell us a little bit about some of the unique challenges that students in foster care face.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think students in foster care bounce around a lot, whether it's, they're in an initial foster home or they're in a group home and that they move around. And so research would say that every time a child moves from school to school, they lose 6 months of academics. And so for some of our kids that we work with, they've moved 5 times in the past year. So if you think of that, just academically, they're at a disadvantage. And then there was a really interesting study done by Stanford Medical Center that said that children who have experienced trauma are 32 times more likely to experience learning difficulties as a direct tie to the trauma they've experienced. And so most of our students, they receive special education, but it's not necessarily what you'd think of in terms of disabilities. It's a lot of times learning disabilities or developmental disabilities that are directly tied to either substance abuse or trauma they've experienced. And then I think just the achievement gap that exists because of those learning disabilities or because of, bouncing around from school to school. I think some of those are the main challenges that we see for kids that we're helping.
Yeah, and I think, I think back to my own childhood, and I've got some siblings that have some learning disabilities that they dealt with throughout their lives. And what happens is you don't know how to express the way that you're feeling, right? And so then it leads to social problems in the classroom.
Right.
And then you're kind of branded as a problem child.
Right. You're the bad kid.
Yeah, exactly. And you're not necessarily, there's learning disabilities, but a lot of those can be overcome, whether it's dyslexia or, just a lot of other things, or just being behind because you moved schools 5 times in a year.
Right.
But once you're branded as that bad kid, if the teacher doesn't understand it or the other kids don't understand it, then it just becomes compounded and it turns into a real problem over the years.
Yeah, I was just at a school for a meeting for a kiddo that I'm working with, and the teacher was saying he always runs under the desk or he tries to run away. And I said, well, when does he do that? And she said, oh, it's every time we do reading. And this kid's a 3rd grader that can't read. And I was like, Well, there you go. That's why that's why he's running away. He doesn't know how to do what you're asking him, and it's easier to save face and be the bad kid by doing those things rather than be in front of your peers and admit that you don't know how to read. And so, yeah, I think that's a huge thing that we're trying to overcome and help students is oftentimes they are identified as those bad kids or the kids with behavioral issues. And we really feel like behavior is communication. So in that example, that kid was trying to communicate, I don't know how to do this, but he didn't use those words. His actions spoke that. But if we're able to kind of help translate that to the school team and then get him the support he needs to build up those skills, we really feel like he could be a lot more successful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, in your opinion, how well equipped today is our school system to deal with this or special needs in general?
Ugh. I'm scared to answer that question. You know, Arizona is, I think, 49th in school funding. And so because of funding, I think that's put schools in really, really difficult positions, especially post-COVID. And so I think kids that need academic interventions or need help with occupational therapy, that all costs money. And so when you have schools that are trying to balance their budgets and also meet the needs of children, you have this kind of catch-22, or between a rock and a hard place is kind of where schools find themselves. And so I think it's not because schools don't want to help children, but I think there's just a lack of resources in our schools, in our state in particular, that make it really challenging for schools to do what they really want to do and want to do well. So unfortunately, the most vulnerable kids are the kind of caught in the crossfire of that, which is really hard to see. Yeah.
I think it's tough to watch. You know, so you mentioned occupational therapy. That's what my daughter wants to do. She just started her first year of college, so she's got a ways to go until she does that. But she's worked her whole high school and even into junior high with the special needs kids at her school. And she just really has a gift for it. She's drawn to them. She works very well with them. And so, you know, there are people like her.
Yeah.
This is not unique. My daughter's, well, it might be unique for a teenager. She's 18 now, but there are plenty of people who relate well with children with special needs and who have a desire to help them. But, you know, this is probably the toughest question that I'll ask you all day today, but in your perfect world, right? You've been doing this, you know, for 3 years as a nonprofit. How old's your daughter again?
She's 12.
Okay, so you've been advocating for her for
10
12
years.
you know, 10,
12 years. Yeah.
So you've got more experience than most. In a perfect world, how do we solve this in our community?
Yeah, I think it takes, well, like the phrase says, it takes a village. I really think that schools on their own are not equipped to meet all the needs of students. And so I do feel like it comes, whether it's faith communities or businesses, to partner with schools to help kind of bridge some of those gaps that exist. Ideally, I think that schools would be funded so that they could meet, you know, staffing wise, they could hire enough people, that teachers would be paid well enough where they would want to stay. I know this gets kind of political, but I do think that ideally we would value education so much and we would value our children so much that we would be willing to put the money and the investment into our schools that it takes to really educate not just any student, but the most vulnerable student.
Yeah, I think, you know, that's where it gets tough, right? And unfortunately, it does become political. I don't think it should, but it does.
Right.
You know, the reality is we all want, well, I think most parents want their children to have a good educational experience.
Right.
Specifically, if they have any sort of special need, they want their children to be taken care of and get the education that they need.
Right.
They're going to do everything that they can at home, but what we're hearing is that the educational system is not equipped to fill that gap.
Right.
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 Now, earlier you mentioned that the state of Arizona is the 49th state out of 50, by the way, in terms of funding.
Right.
Right. Now, my understanding is that our test scores in Arizona are actually not bad. They're kind of middle of the road
Mhm.
with that funding.
Mhm.
As a business owner, as a taxpayer, as everybody
Yeah.
out there is, it seems to me that it's a financial problem, right? And
Mhm.
me being a financial guy, I would want to say, okay, let's look at this budget, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
I'll be the first to raise my hand and stand up and say teachers are way underpaid in our country.
Absolutely. Yeah.
There's no way
Across
around
the
that.
board. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's actually amazing to me that some of the teachers that we have choose to be teachers
Right.
knowing that,
Mhm.
right? My daughter reminds me, all the time that she had a couple of teachers that really had an impact on her. She went to Highland High School in Gilbert,
Mhm.
and that had a tremendous impact on her, and they had careers prior to
Mm.
becoming teachers,
Mhm.
and careers that paid way more than they get paid as a teacher.
Right.
They feel more fulfilled as a teacher,
Mhm.
but they still made that decision to walk away from that money to become
Right.
a teacher. That situation is very rare,
Mhm.
right? Most people are gonna choose a career, one that they love, but they're gonna
Mhm.
choose it based on what they can make from a financial standpoint throughout their career.
Right.
And when we have teacher not being one of those top career
Mhm.
opportunities out there, how do we get the teachers that we need, first of all, that care and want to be there and do a
Right.
good job for our kids, specifically those with special needs,
Mhm.
if we don't pay them to
Right.
do that? And then on top of that, the other side of that is the budget to get enough teachers in the classroom
Right.
and enough training in the classroom for those teachers
Mhm.
to handle these specific situations.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's Finland that has one of the best education systems, and I remember learning a little bit about how they pay their teachers. They pay them as very high tier professionals. All their teachers have master's degrees, and it's a very prestigious job, very competitive. And so I think, yeah, if we paid teachers and had that same expectation, we would be able to attract and retain teachers. But unfortunately, right now in Arizona, teachers are leaving by the droves, which is really unfortunate.
Yeah, I think it's tough to watch. I keep telling my wife that I think she would be a fantastic teacher.
Mm.
She had studied that initially. She wanted to be a history teacher, and she did her student teaching
Mm-hmm.
at a high school and learned very quickly that most students are not as passionate about history as she was. And so she said, you know what? I don't think this is for me, right?
Uh-huh.
Because they don't care.
Mm-hmm.
They're coming in, putting their head down, and going to sleep because they could care less about my lesson plan.
Right.
They may be, interested in their whatever PE class or math or science or whatever's most interesting to them, but they're not interested for the most part in history.
Right.
And that was hard for her because my wife's very passionate
Hmm.
about history.
Mm-hmm.
So she changed what she does for a living. She's a freelance genealogist, so it's still research and
Yeah.
writing. And now she does a lot of work with some nonprofits with refugees, and so she's still doing a lot of good in the world.
Yeah.
But my wife and her ability to teach, I think she would be phenomenal
Yeah.
at it. But she's making a decision based on, one, it's hard,
Yeah.
and two, it doesn't pay that well.
Right. Right.
So, I don't think you'll ever see our country go the way of Finland,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
Because the money that they're putting into that with
Mhm.
the way that their government structure is, it's
Mhm.
just not going to happen in our country.
Right.
But there's got to be something done
Right.
differently, I think.
Yeah. And I do want to give a huge shout out to the teachers that are still teaching, because I have, met some incredible teachers who are super passionate, and even through the whole pandemic are just going above and beyond. And so I think we have some amazing teachers in Arizona, and I really want them to feel appreciated and honored for the work that they're doing. And it matters. And keep it up, teachers. We see you. You're doing a great job.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. I mean, there's probably, just like in anything, some bad apples out there, right? That are just kind of finishing their term to get the pension and all that sort of thing. But by and large, the teachers are committed people who care deeply about our children and their education.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
For sure.
I don't know, man. I'm gonna have to look into that a little bit more and
You'll have to solve it for us.
yeah. I don't have a voice large enough, I don't think, to solve it. But, the more I think about it, I mean, as a homeowner, knowing that a good portion of my property taxes go to fund the schools,
Right.
that also creates a problem in and of itself, because
Mm-hmm.
I live in an affluent community, and
Right.
so my kids get a pretty good education at Highland High School in the Gilbert public school system.
Mm-hmm.
But in other areas where the property taxes aren't as high because the homes aren't worth as much money,
Right.
then they end up getting a subpar education in
Right.
a lot of cases, and I feel like that's wrong.
Right.
It just doesn't make any sense. Everybody
Yeah.
should have an equal opportunity at the same type of education, regardless of your financial
Absolutely.
background.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree.
So
Yeah.
I was lucky. I think I had some good teachers, even though I did grow up in a very poor area and didn't have the best opportunities. But I had those teachers that
Yeah.
were very committed and wanted to work hard and help me along, so to speak.
For sure. Yeah.
All right. Well, now we're going to go even deeper. So before we do that, let's take a quick break and we'll have our call to action, and then we'll come back and talk about some of the other aspects of what you guys do.
Sounds good.
Hey there, Tycoons. Austin Peterson here, co-host of Tycoons of Small Biz. If you think you have what it takes to be considered a tycoon and you're wondering how you could become a featured guest, please follow and then message us at Tycoons of Small Biz on LinkedIn. We'd love to have a conversation with you to see if it is a mutually good fit, and if so, we'll get you scheduled for an interview. If you're unsure about being a guest on our podcast, but are contemplating selling your business over the next few years and you'd like to know what your business is worth, please also follow us and then message us on LinkedIn for your no-obligation, informal valuation of your business. We look forward to hearing from you, and thanks for listening to the Tycoons of Small Biz podcast. And now, back to today's program. All right, welcome back, Tycoons. We're here, Austin Peterson here, host of Tycoons of Small Biz, here with Jenny Mullins, co-founder and program manager with Advocacy 31.9. We've covered a lot today. I think we've covered the fact that I think everybody already knew this, but our educational system in this country is kind of broken.
Yep.
It needs to be better. And there's going to have to be some change from the inside out, and unfortunately, that's likely going to mean that in order to fix that, we've got to pay more taxes in some way, shape, or form. And I'm a fiscal conservative, I would say, so I'm not a big proponent of raising taxes. But if our educational system is falling short, something's got to be fixed, right? Now, I think that there's a lot that needs to be fixed in Washington, not to get political. We've got a lot of stuff that's being spent on stuff that shouldn't be spent, that it shouldn't be spent on, and it could go to our school systems and kind of solve this issue. So, I'll leave it at that without getting without getting overly political. But so a couple tough things to talk about before we kind of end on a positive note.
Yeah.
So, what does it look like from a school to prison pipeline system or situation in the foster system?
Yeah, I'd love to tell a story, kind of to illustrate this. So one of my very first cases, when I first became an advocate, a mom called us about a kindergartner who had thrown Play-Doh in his school, his kindergarten classroom. The kindergarten teacher sent him down to the principal. She must have been frustrated, didn't know what to do. The principal called the police and then called the mom and told the mom, your son's going to have a felony for throwing Play-Doh unless you pick him up right now. I was like, wait, what? I didn't even have a category for that. Like, what do you mean, a felony? This little boy had been in and out of foster care. He was a black little boy, raised by a single mom, and that's when I learned about the school to prison pipeline. So the ACLU, I'll just kind of read from my notes because I want to make sure I get it right, but the school to prison pipeline is a disturbing national trend where children are pushed out of schools and into the juvenile and criminal justice systems. Students of color and students with disabilities are most affected because of discriminatory, punitive school discipline policies and lack of resources and training in schools. This is the part that haunts me. As a result, far too many of our most at-risk students end up incarcerated instead of educated. And so I saw with that kindergartner that school to prison pipeline was already, the groundwork for that was already laid in this little boy's life. And so as I started getting more and more students impacted by foster care referred to me, and I started working in schools, I realized that oftentimes, like we talked about, kids get labeled as the bad kid. And so oftentimes that leads to a suspension. And without people advocating within the system to be like, hey, wait a second, this kid's needs aren't being met, that's why they're getting in trouble, often that leads to expulsion. And once a student's expelled from school, other schools can, they don't have to enroll a student. And so oftentimes that leads to further trouble, and then they get into the juvenile justice system. And so I've seen this play out with students I've worked with. And once they get into juvenile justice, it's really hard to pull them back because that pipeline is just well-oiled. Like, it's just really hard to get out of. It's not impossible, but it really takes a lot of people that are advocating for the needs of that student to get what they need at school. And so as I started learning more about this, I started thinking, okay, why is this happening, and what could be done preventatively to get to this point? This isn't an inevitable fact. Like, we can't just accept this. Or to me, I felt like I can't just accept that this happens. And so I started thinking, what if that boy or the teenager in this one situation, what if he had gotten help learning how to read? He had dyslexia, couldn't read. What if he had learned how to read and he had teachers that could make accommodations for him? He might not be getting in trouble and then lead to all these other downstream effects. So we really feel like if we could swim upstream and meet the needs of students, we could prevent a lot of these downstream effects and save taxpayers a lot of money in the process, because it costs a lot of money to put people in prison. So yeah, that is the hard reality that I unfortunately had the eyes to see, but I was implicated once I saw it, and I can't unsee it. And so I feel like it's become my mission in life to prevent that from happening for as many children as I can. I can't prevent that. You know, I'm not the savior to anybody, but as far as I can to help students not get to that point.
Yeah, I mean, I find myself getting a little emotional listening to you tell that and share that information, because no child deserves that, period, right?
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, I don't know that, yes, we need smaller classrooms, right? But I think that, like you said, it ends up costing us just as much or more to put them into that system rather than just helping them when they were younger,
right,
to begin with, right? And if we've got people who are advocating, right, so good, proper parents or foster parents who are going to advocate for them, your organization that have these advocates that go in and help, you know, maybe every classroom, if we can't get more teachers or make the classroom smaller, I've got to think that there are plenty of stay-at-home moms in our country who would love to go in and work for 3 or 4 hours in the classroom to help separate them from the rest of the class if needed, to help them with the things that they need help with so that they can then rejoin the class and feel comfortable there and continue to thrive,
right,
or, you know, start to thrive really for the first time in the classroom. I think that those statistics are just sobering.
Yeah. And I think on the flip side of that, the positive side, is that really what helps prevent some of that is just connection with a caring adult. And so the more connections that a child who's experienced trauma has with a caring and loving adult, the more healing that they experience and the more growth that they experience. So I don't think that this is inevitable, that students that, you know, are at risk or have struggle, that inevitably this has to happen to them. I think that it's kind of for all of us to step in and be those caring people and positive connections for students who are at risk.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's plenty that would do it on a volunteer basis to go in and provide that. And definitely, if there were people who could do it as a part-time job, that would love to go in and do that.
Yeah.
You know, my wife has an older sister that does exactly this. I mean, she's a teacher's aide. She goes in and she helps children that have different learning disabilities or other special needs in a low-income area in Provo, Utah. And she's been doing it for almost 20 years, I learned. I didn't realize it had been that long until we visited her over Thanksgiving. But she finds it fulfilling.
Yeah.
It's hard,
Yeah.
right? It's really hard to do, especially the older you get, because
Right.
she's my wife's oldest sister, so
Okay.
she's well into her 60s now, and it becomes harder to get down on the floor with
Right.
5-year-old kids and those sorts
Yeah.
of things. But it's needed, and it's a rewarding way to spend your time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I think we need to get the word out to get more people who
Yeah.
would be willing to go in and volunteer, and get the school districts willing to let them come in,
Right.
if they understood what kind of an impact that they can have.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So one more sobering thing to go into before we get to the positive things. So we see it in the national news. It's no secret to anybody that COVID has affected students, period.
Yeah.
Right? They're saying that they're 1 to 2 years behind on average.
Right.
But then the children in the margins, as they like to say, which fits right in here,
Right.
have been affected even worse, whether it's that they didn't have access to the technology to
Right.
get on the Zoom, or whatever it was, they find themselves even further behind. So talk to us about what you've seen there.
Yeah, what I'm seeing, so we work with a lot of students in group homes as well. And I feel like those students have been most impacted, because if they were in a group home, they didn't necessarily have somebody to sit right next to them, making sure they get their homework or logged into Zoom. And so, yeah, we are seeing that achievement gap just get wider and wider. It already existed, but COVID just revealed, I think, this achievement gap, and then it got wider. We have a partnership with the Tempe Union School District, and so I was talking to their foster care liaison, who kind of oversees kids in foster care, and then as well students that are homeless. And he said from last year to this year, they lost half of their population. They don't know where they are. They either didn't enroll in school, or on the streets. Like, they just don't know what happened to them. And so, for him, he's like, this is half of our kids. We don't know what happened to them. And also in Arizona, funding is decided it's tabulated by pupil, by students. So if you lose a majority of your students, you lose a majority of your funding as well. And so I think COVID is just, it's mixing everything up, and a lot of kids are getting lost in the shuffle, especially kids in foster care and kids, that are homeless. That a lot of districts, I'm hearing this, they don't know where they are. They're sending social workers to their homes, trying to find them, trying to get them enrolled. But it's been a huge issue that I think is just hard to tackle and figure out what's going on.
Yeah, I think that information might even be more sobering than the school to prison pipeline. I mean, half of the students that aren't returning after this is, that's terrible.
A lot of high school students had to stay home with their younger siblings, and take care of siblings. If their parents had to work, if they were frontline workers or working at a gas station or whatever. And so a lot of times those students just didn't show up on Zoom. And this year, I think a lot of them just dropped out, unfortunately. Which is really concerning to think about the long-term impact of this generation of kids. I think it's going to take a lot of work to recoup some of what all children have lost during COVID, but especially, kind of like you said, for kids in the margins.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, and then that goes right back to the same statistic before, that high school dropouts actually have a higher propensity to go towards prison as
Right.
well. And
Right.
so
Yeah.
that probably makes the statistics overall increase.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. It's interesting how much, I didn't realize this till I started working in this area, but how much incarceration is so directly tied to education. If you can get a student to graduate from high school, their rates of incarceration go way down. And even like the school to prison pipeline, it's so tied. And so I think whatever we do to support students educationally has exponential benefit down the road, that we might not see until later, but the societal impact of that is huge. So if we can focus on getting students the help that they need, we're just going to reap a lot of reward in that.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I think, if we look at it that way rather than we've got a problem, right? We already talked about the educational system being broken in our country. We know the prison system is broken in our country. I mean, it's baffling to me to realize that we're the richest country in the world,
Yeah.
and we're failing on these fronts.
Yeah.
Right, our education system is a problem, and then we've got a higher incidence of imprisonment than any country in the world.
Right.
It doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
First of all, because of how much money's here, and second, those two are tied together, and so solve one,
Right.
solve the other.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it obviously makes sense that we solve the education side because it's going to make the prison side be solved on its own.
Or at least reduce it for sure. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to get away from having any prisons,
Right,
right?
right.
There are still going to be people who commit crimes and deserve to be in prison.
Right.
But, there's definitely a fair amount of people that are in prison today that shouldn't be,
Right.
and even more that wouldn't be if they'd been helped
Exactly.
when they were younger.
Yeah, absolutely. And that really is what drives me. You know, people always talk about what's your why. This is my why, because I feel like, yeah, if I can think about that little boy that threw Play-Doh and who, you know, the police call or the principal called and said the police were going to charge him with a felony, which is ridiculous. But to think about what will that child's life be like if he gets the help he needs at school versus what will his life be like if he doesn't. Like, that really is what drives and motivates me to keep showing up for kids. And I think it takes a lot of us to keep showing up for kids that need it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, a completely different topic, but we had a guest on a few months ago, and she's a Latina business owner here, and here in the Valley. She's got a very successful media and advertising agency that does quite a bit with multicultural communications. Really, really smart lady, great business. But we got to talking in her episode about the disparity between the number of white people who are who own businesses, the number of white people who have more wealth, all those sorts of things. And there's definitely a divide in our country.
Right.
And what we came to the conclusion of on that episode is that it needs to be people like you and me, right? I'm a white, affluent man. You're a white, presumably affluent woman.
Yeah.
But we're working in these areas to try to help those who aren't the same as us.
Right.
And it has to be that way. I mean, it's become such an issue in our country that they can't necessarily help themselves 100%, right? We've got to be willing to stand up and say, this isn't right. We've got to help fix it, right? Whether it happened on purpose because we wanted to, our ancestors wanted that to be the case, or just the fact that that's the way that it is today, we've got to stand up and help these people who are in the margins so that their future is different and they've got the same opportunities as the rest of us have.
Yeah, and I think about our tagline, amplify their voice. It's not that people in the margins don't have a voice. It's just we're not listening. And so I do agree with you that it's part of our job is to help other people listen to what people are saying that aren't being heard.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's different to say, I'm not racist or I don't feel any differently about any member of the population versus every member of the population deserves to have the same opportunities, and I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure that everybody else has the same opportunities that I had.
Yeah. Yeah.
That, I think, is the difference. And so I think what you're doing is phenomenal.
Thank you.
You're standing up for people who need their voices to be amplified. You are that amplification, and I take my hat off to you for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
So now let's talk about some success stories.
Yeah.
Tell us about some things that have gone well throughout the
Yeah.
last 3 years that you've been doing this.
Yeah. So we had 2 girls that were in a group home in Phoenix and were adopted by this amazing family in a very rural part of Arizona. And they reached out to us. School had no idea how to help these kids because they're like, we don't know. They were both trafficking victims. So the part of why they were moved into such a rural placement was so that they would be safe. And so we were able to connect the school district with one of a top trauma specialist that was able to connect them to a therapist up there and really get them the support they need. And they're both thriving at school. I just talked to the foster mom, and they're both doing really, really well. So that's been really fun. And honestly, COVID allowed us to have a broader reach through Zoom, because normally we'd not travel that far, but everything was on Zoom, so it didn't matter where they were in the state. So we were able to really help students that maybe normally we wouldn't have been able to impact them. Another student was one that I talked about earlier, but he was in 5 group homes, I believe, and then he was in the juvenile justice system for a while. And he was adopted by a wonderful man who, when this boy was 17, so that's really rare to be adopted at 17, but he was adopted. We were able to get the school to provide the support he needs. We found out he had dyslexia, so he got some tutoring to catch up in reading, and he was he was failing all of his classes and about to drop out prior to being adopted. And then kind of through the support of the school and the foster parent, he is now planning on going to college. So we're super excited for him, and just to see that transformation in a really short amount of time, and to see what happens when, his voice is advocated for and the school is all on the same page working to support him. What a transformation can happen. Another story that comes to mind is this little boy who is named James, and he would collect things on the school playground, and he kept getting in trouble for this. And so we figured out, why is he getting in trouble, or why is he doing this? And we found out, he was at a group home before, and everything was stolen from him. And so he had nothing to his name, so he'd just collect anything. And so once we were able to meet with the team and explain to the school team and explain to his teacher, this is his story, this is why he's doing that. Instead of getting in trouble, now his job is to be the treasure collector on the recess, and he feels really good about that. And, all the kids are like, oh, find me a treasure on the playground. And so small things like that are huge wins for him, because instead of getting in trouble for something that's just a survival skill for him, now he's being rewarded, and the kids are like, oh, you're so cool because you found whatever on the playground. So stories like that are just really cool to see. A lot of it is just a mindset shift for teachers or for school teams. Once they understand the story of a child and what they've experienced, they start to think about the behavior differently, and then they start to think creatively, like, what could we do to help this student instead of just have them go to detention or something like that. So those are fun stories to just see how I could go on and on of stories like that, but when people really gain empathy and hear the stories of kids that have gone through a lot, how much their life can change dramatically.
Yeah, I think that's the key, right? The last thing that you said about empathy.
Yeah.
I mean, if you show empathy to everybody in this world, and you don't assume that
Yeah.
what they're going through and treat them as though it's their worst day,
Yeah.
right? Then everybody's going to be treated the way that they want to be treated or should be treated.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's, all 3 of those stories were impactful stories,
Yeah.
right? And so as somebody who has training in sales,
Uh-huh.
that's the opportunity to then go in for the sale, right?
Yeah.
So talk to us about, obviously that changes the trajectory of those kids' lives.
Absolutely.
We've talked about how what you guys do in advocating and helping them to get the proper education and the help that they need while they're in the school system
Right.
is going to change their trajectory of their life. It's going to keep them out of prison. It's going to do all these wonderful things for them. So how do we get involved? How does the listenership of our show get involved with your organization? What can we do to help?
Well, thank you for asking that question. We, because we're a nonprofit, we don't take any government funding, very intentionally, because we don't want the strings attached with that. And so all of our funding comes either through foundation grants, through businesses that have grant funding, or through the foster care tax credit. In Arizona, we're really blessed to have this tax credit. So we're a qualifying organization, so individuals can give up to 1,000, or individuals can give up to 500, married couples up to 1,000, and that is fully refundable when you file your taxes. So that's a great way that people can support the work that we're doing without it really costing them a lot. And then if you own a business and your business has some sort of foundation, or if you give out grants to community organizations, we'd love to hear about that and see if our organization would be could be a recipient of that and continue the work that we're doing in the community. with the backing of small businesses. We love partnering with businesses in that way and really feel like that's a way for them to have a tangible impact in the local community.
Yeah, I agree. I think, so I've only lived in Arizona for about 7 years now. And when I moved here and learned how the state of Arizona does that with the tax credits with these different organizations, I thought it was a phenomenal way to look at it.
Yeah.
Right. And so if you're a listener to this show and you don't understand how that works, you should look up how that works on the Arizona State Department of Revenue, I think it is.
Yeah.
That talks about that, because literally they're giving you the opportunity to direct your state income tax the way that you want it to.
Right.
And so everybody who's listening has at least a $500 or $1,000 tax liability to the state of Arizona.
Right.
You have the ability to say, I want this to go to Advocacy 319, and they apply it as though you paid your taxes directly to the state of Arizona.
Right. It's amazing. It's huge for nonprofits in Arizona, and I really think it's allowed nonprofits to flourish in Arizona because we're able to be funded in this way. So if you want to learn more about that, on our website, I don't know if we can link to it, but www.advocacy319.org. We have a whole frequently asked questions about the tax credit because we get a lot of questions about it. So you can donate on that website and lots of information about it.
Absolutely. So obviously you just gave the website. We will link to the website and anything that we post on social media after the show as well. But how do people get in touch with you besides the website? Are you active on LinkedIn?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn, on Facebook. On Facebook, we have a Advocacy 319 Facebook group. We post a lot on that. And then I'm also personally on there. If people want to find me there or on LinkedIn, that'd be great.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I've really appreciated the conversation. I've learned some things. I've been reminded of some things that are really important for me to be reminded of.
Yeah.
And I'm sure our listeners feel the same way. So
great.
We appreciate you being in the studio today and being willing to have this conversation with us.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been fun.
You bet. Thank you for all you do.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Tycoons of Small Biz, proudly hosted by Austin Peterson and Landon Mance. Austin and Landon are comprehensive financial planning professionals specializing in financial, estate, and succession planning for small business owners. Austin and Landon have offices in Scottsdale, Arizona, and Las Vegas, Nevada, and represent clients in 14 states throughout the country. Join Austin, Landon, and the featured Tycoons live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. right here on Business Radio X and your favorite podcast platform.